Well, first up, I'd like to introduce to our little tribute show, Sharon Mahony. She was a producer at WIOD. She did produce Steve Kane's show, which followed Neil at the time. But she had a lot of interaction with Neil, and Neil talked a lot about her.
The day Neil Rogers died, I was in Key West. It was one of the coldest Christmases ever in Key West. I hadn't been back to South Florida in years, and I was there freezing in Key West. And, you know, I'm a news fan. I almost never miss the news, so I tuned into a local Miami station that evening and heard that Neil had died Christmas Eve. I was really shocked and very saddened by it, really sad. I'd had the great pleasure of working with Neil at WIOD just for about a year and a half. I didn't officially work for Neil. I was hired to be Steve Kane's producer and did some other things at the station, promos, which Neil loved to rag on, FCC community service reports, vital stuff like that. When I was first hired, I had no idea Neil would be working at WIOD. When they told me he was moving over to us shortly after I got hired, I was so excited. I mean, just so happy, because I had become a huge fan of his. We used to listen to him secretly in the newsroom at WNWS. We had to quickly lower the volume if any member of management came into the newsroom because they had an obsession with it. Listening to Neil was a firing offense over there. Back then, I didn't know much about Neil's early days or the history of his time with WS News, but I knew their management had a real incredible obsession with him, and not in a good way. So, as a fan, I was just ecstatic to be working at the same station. When Neil moved over, the level of excitement was just unbelievable at the station. When I first met him, I was so surprised at just how low-key and unassuming Neil was. I mean, in person, he was just a regular nice guy. And I was more used to on-air talent having these huge egos. And Neil wasn't like that, not at all. One of the things I loved best about Neil was his laugh. Man, he could really laugh, and it was so infectious. You couldn't help but laugh when he really, cut loose with one of those crazy laughs of his. Of course, some of his best shows were when he was upset about something, and when Neil went on a tear, there was nothing like it. I mean, people were running for cover, management. It was like there was an air raid or something. It was crazy. There were a lot of funny things that happened due to the strange nature of the guests I sometimes booked on Steve's show. Like when we had the medical marijuana people and they were just openly toking their joints all over the station. I think it was Bill Wise who came into my little office and was begging me to please keep the marijuana people contained in the break room and not wandering all over the station. I mean, weed smell was everywhere. Yeah, Neil had fun with that one. And the urine lady, ugh. Yeah, I had to go into the ladies' room with her to make sure she was really drinking her own urine, and it reeked so bad. Of course, it was pretty concentrated that I threw up. And anyway, Neil had fun with that one. And all the weird porno shows that Steve would do. I was pretty young and naive back then, and Steve would get a kick out of shocking me with various gross stuff. And, Neil always seemed to be like, commiserate with me. The thing is, I really got to love Neil. He was always so sweet to me. Of course, he did rip into me now and then, or rather quite often, but, that was like a badge of honor. I didn't do much on air with Neil. I was a behind-the-scenes person mainly. Well, one of the funs I did get to do on the air with him was when I stole his car and hid it in Coconut Grove. That was fun. And then when I left the station to go sailing, he threw a really nice going-away party for me with lots of food in the studio. And, once I left, I never heard his shows after that until you guys started the Neil Rogers site. And then I got to hear him again. And it's been great to hear Neil's voice, and especially his rants, and most of all, his laugh. I have to be honest with you, one of the things I love best about this Neil Rogers group is when I read some of your comments, I can actually hear Neil's voice in my head. Maybe I'm crazy, but thanks for calling. I hear that when I read thanks for calling. I think Bruce Clifford likes to say that. It's sad the way Neil went out. I wish it could have been different. He was a brilliant, brilliant man, and he was so good at what he did. And it's kind of sad the way he did end up. But it was the highlight of my radio career. Definitely working with him was the highlight. After I left, I never did go back to radio. You know, I got a life. But I will remember that great year, and Neil was the best part of it. And I will remember him forever. Thanks.
Hi.
Now, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Why did you have a knapsack and all that stuff put together before you left here this morning and got in my car?
Well, Neil, I had to tell you, I had second thoughts about the whole thing. You know, Steve's been driving me crazy lately. And I thought, well, I've got to get out of here.
Well, I want to remind you of one thing. You pretty got some nerve wasting all of this valuable time. You could be booking guests for Steve, because you're Steve's producer, not my producer.
Oh, yes, let's get that clear.
Let's straighten that out right up front, okay?
But I know you're a generous man, Neil.
Yes.
And your car will
Well, I
help
hope you
me
enjoy it, yeah.
put together my escape fund.
Okay, don't go putting any cheap oil in it either, okay? It's got to use that real expensive stuff. It's one of those high-priced hot cars.
And super test, right?
So where are you? Well, we don't want to give any clues as to where you're going. But anyway, Sharon is in the process of hiding the car, and then Ken and Jay from our good friends over there at LoJack are following. So they've stuck the device in the car, right?
Yeah, they put the device in the car. But I tell you, Neil, they're going to have a hard time. You know my diabolical mind. I have really, really hidden it very well.
Good. How about the car? Yeah, cute. Okay, so what are they doing now? In other words, they gave you a head start. How many minutes head start?
I hate to tell you this because they're really hot on my tail. There's been a Coral Gables police car that's been circling around the area.
A Coral Gables police car.
Right.
Uh-huh. Isn't that interesting?
Because they notify all the police agencies, and then the police have transmitters as well.
Well, if there's a Coral Gables police car tailing you, I'd govern myself accordingly if I were you.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to go up to Hallandale.
Okay, so you're going to hide it now, and then how much later are they going to start looking? Because I know we're going to talk to them again.
I have hidden it.
Oh, you already have hidden it, and they're looking.
Yeah, they're looking.
Okay.
But they haven't found it. Neil, I'm telling you, it's hidden very well.
I'll bet. Okay, well, let's make sure that you don't hide it too well. You know what I'm saying, Sharon?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I had second thoughts about it. I thought, if they don't find it, that's my ticket out of here.
Yeah, okay. Trust me, the device works real well, okay? Okay, we'll talk to you a little later.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, Neil.
County, hello.
Hello, Publix. About this spoiled beast.
That was the Miami Shores lady.
Uh-huh.
Greetings, fellow Neelys. This is George Kelley, but I guess you might know me better as Miss Miami Shores. I had a few character voices I used to crank probably every talk host in South Florida with back then, including Paco, who was a Cuban exile obsessed with global communist conspiracies, and also a nameless redneck, which I used to use to make up outrageous tales, usually involving Sally Fitz and odd sexual practices. But Miss Miami Shores, or Adelaide, as I dubbed her, was my favorite. And I love that Neil was in on the joke and seemed to get a kick out of it. The funny thing is that I knew Neil back then, kind of. We weren't close, but I did know him. I'd done a few youth panel shows with him at INZ, which weren't really great, compelling radio, to be honest. But it did allow me to spend considerable time with him in the studio and kind of get to know him. And then later at IOD, I lived really close to the studio, and I'd sometimes go pick up lunch for him from the Thai place across the street, and then just kind of hang out in the studio for a while during the show. So we knew each other, but he had no clue at all that this odd, middle-aged Southern woman calling about Bob Graham frolicking with children or the Pope playing with gerbils, well, he had no idea that was me. Not until years later when we randomly wound up on the same flight to Amsterdam from Miami, and I fessed up. And he seemed pretty amused by the whole thing. So, look, radio down there, as I think all of you know, was so great back then. We had Phil Henry, Mad Dog, John McHugh, others, and then some that sucked too. But Neil, God, like the rest of you, I miss him terribly. But I'm grateful to have known him and to have been a very small part of the show. And I hope it entertained people, even if it wasn't me, but it was as an old gerbil-obsessed Southern woman from Miami Shores. So thank you.
No, this is not Bob.
Oh, I know who
this
this
is Adelaide in the
This is
show.
Miami Shore.
Yeah, I remember now. From Zeta, you called us.
Yes. How are you, darling?
Where the fish were jumping with glee, yes.
They were jumping with glee.
I'll
yes.
bet.
Now, I have to keep you updated. As you know, the Super Bowl is here.
Yeah.
And Miami Shores is planning some activities of our own
I'll
for the
bet,
Super
yeah.
Bowl. Now, you know, some of these other activities have chosen to include some of these silly minority groups. Well, we have decided to concentrate just on the Anglo-Saxon Protestant angle of the Super Bowl. Now, may I tell you what we have planned? Now, first of all, for the children, now for the white children that will be coming to our community, we will be providing, in cooperation with local churches, a Christian petting zoo. The children will either have the choice of petting some of our local Christians who have decided they will be petted, or they can pet cute little bunnies and white mice. Now, we're also offering Mayo Fest 89. Now, this will take place the weekend before the big game, when citizens will be invited to come into the community and stuff their faces with as many Wonder Bread and mayonnaise sandwiches as they can possibly eat. Now, as an added bonus, if they can speak German while eating these sandwiches, they will win the grand prize. And, of course, as always, this event is hosted by Rick Shaw, famous DJ in
That
town.
does it for me, yeah.
Now, the grand finale, this is really going to flip this city on its side. We're going to melt down giant large statues of a chosen white Christian player from each of the competing teams. Now, once they are melted down, we will have a communal lard pool in the center of the Miami Shores Country Club. And we will invite all citizens to come in and swim gleefully and express their greatest Christian emotions. And, of course, Ann Bishop will be hosting this event as always.
As always, yeah.
And, of course, any Canadians that want to come by, we are, as always, we're offering free showers for all of them. You know, it breaks my heart so to go by these trailer parks where they live and see them washing their clothing in the water fountains. Children. Well, anyway, Neil, I just think life is grand, and, of course, I am praying for you. I am praying.
Well, keep it up, as they
Thank
say.
you, dear.
Okay.
Up next is Fruitcake, the most infamous caller to Neil at other talk shows in South Florida.
Hey, John, this is Avi. How are you?
Just fine. How are you doing?
Fine.
My question was that you were in Israel when Neil started, Mr. Sturgeon.
Well, every time I would come down to Miami about once a year, and I would turn the radio on and listen to him a little bit, and he didn't change. So it always seemed like Neil would live forever. And then one time I came down here, and I didn't hear him, so I went and I Googled his name, and I saw that there were tributes on YouTube to his passing away. And so I realized that was the end of that era. So, what can you do? Life goes on, I guess.
Right, but Neil can't be replaced by anybody.
Well, yeah, obviously, no, I don't think anybody can replace him. Off the bat, with all of my respect and respect him as probably the best radio host I've heard in Miami. Although I did hear an equivalent of him in Israel, who's doing also tremendously well. I will say that I do think that there is another Neil Rogers out there somewhere. You just need to find him. And I say before, he's one in a million, but there are other people like him. What made him what was so unique, and maybe we could actually even call special, was that he probably just said everything that he had on his chest. I don't think he censored anything. Except for maybe some 4-letter words that just would keep him on the air and not get him in trouble. But he was probably the most honest person that you could probably meet, not meet, but hear on the air. And probably maybe like that in the person. When I came into the studio, I remember as a kid about 30 years ago, it was very intimidating because what you expect from Neil in person would almost be like what you expect on the air, and actually wasn't like that, because I thought he's gonna attack me or admonish me on the air, and he was very nice. I mean, he didn't talk to me much. I guess he too was intimidated, because you're used to having somebody a Martha or a Jack from Miami Beach, and suddenly you see it's a kid who's sitting in front of you in the studio. So he didn't. He was very well behaved and polite. So was I. It is something. It is like I say, one in a million people that you meet like that and actually have the pleasure to listen to. And it is a shame that he's no longer obviously with us. He probably would have, if he would have maybe done what all of his doctors told him to do and his friends, he probably would have been with us for many more years. But he lived his life to its best according to him. Now unfortunately we are without him, and just with memories, with some cassettes and audios. But even if you go back and listen to all of that, I listened on the air. He was talking about gun control like 20 years ago, and this is way before the thing in Connecticut happened, or so many other things. So you could always say that he always had his hand on the pulse, and he knew exactly what the real problems were, even though he didn't discuss them every day. But besides being a good radio personality, he was also a very smart man, an intelligent man regarding the world as we should see it, and that's something that also we have to remember. Besides him, being able to joke at people and make terrible things, even in a sense, humoristic. I mean, I could go on and on about Neil, and you have to realize I never really, hanged out with him at the track or or went to the melting pot, except I did meet him there once. But there's a lot to be said, and there's a lot to be learned about and from him.
He certainly influenced radio, and for somebody to be, it's unheard of for somebody to be at top of his game at a market for almost 30 years.
Yeah, he was, a lot of people owe their livelihood to Neil, because once he started doing the talk format, other stations realized that talk format is, it's not a too expensive format, I guess. It's cheaper than having a helicopter fly above and give you the traffic on I-95. But people like Steve Kane and Lee Fowler and Al Rantel and all the morning people and the Sandy Paytons that did these kind of formats. Actually, they got like the stamp of approval because of Neil and his success. Because if that format didn't succeed, then no one would really follow footsteps trying to emulate it and duplicate it. Basically, I think that everything that you really think that was going around him, the WNWS, the lineup that they had there from morning to night, was basically trying to get into the same niche that WINZ started at night and then carried on to the daytime. So those people have also a lot to be thankful for just his presence. Gave them a weekly or a bi-monthly paycheck, and a fat one too, just because Neil was around, and he was like the center of this industry, at least for the AMs, for a very, very, very long time. It is something that I always say I hope that someday will be on again. And unfortunately, I don't see any of the stations you're trying to even find anybody like him. It's like it seems that they're kind of lazy in that kind of field. Whatever they can throw on the air and program and give them some money, then that seems to work for them at the present moment.
And plus, all the big companies want to take the safe way out. They don't want any controversy.
I think we mentioned that when we were talking, where if you try and sometimes put yourself in the shoes of a general manager, and I don't remember most of the names, like the Mike Anthonys and the Gary Lawrences. Was it Gary Lawrence? I think he was the manager too, right? He used to mention him.
Right.
So if you probably think about it, that a manager doesn't want too much trouble. He wants to show that he's bringing money and they're profitable, all that kind of stuff, and he probably doesn't want to get letters from some parent company up in Charlotte, North Carolina, saying, "Hey, what's going on over there? We're getting letters about that," because that then he could probably lose his job. And they don't. I think that a lot of these companies, I don't know how many of them were actually public companies looking at the bottom line, but public company always likes to keep low profile, and Neil was one of those people who never really gave them an opportunity. On one hand, he was like, "Yeah, here, take a few $1 million for my show a year," but on the other hand, you're going to have to deal with the heat, and these companies really, I think he used to mention the thing about not having balls, and I think they were probably neutered a long time ago. And this is why it was actually, at sometimes surprising that he could get away with what he was getting away with. And if he didn't have the ratings, I don't think anybody would have kept him on the air just because he was, Neil the funny guy or anything like that. So there's a lot to be learned also from the whole aspect of management and how companies deal with somebody who on the one hand brings them in a ton of money and the other hand is causing a lot of controversy. But if I were a manager, I wouldn't, I would just learn how to deal with it. But I'm not, and so be it.
Well, when Neil had his highest ratings, he was on WINZ working for Guy Gannett, and they couldn't take the controversy anymore. They shuffled him off the FM, then they let him out of his contract. They couldn't take it anymore.
Well,
that's kind of a shame.
As I say before, that's I guess that's a bad call. I mean, unless they were I can understand if somebody's on the air and he's using expletive and that kind of stuff and bringing on lawsuits. I don't think any of these stations were actually ever sued because of anything he said. I mean, there were some, crazy attorneys who would try and do that once in a while, and I don't think that got them any place. But you have to learn how to deal with that kind of stuff. Any company that, that the whole thing is radio, they have to understand that there's personalities and that kind of stuff. And I don't know if is Guy Gannett's still around anymore.
No, Gannett went out of business a long time.
Well, that explains it to you. That explains it to you. I mean, it would be like asking for a rap star not to be controversial and be successful at the same time. I mean, if you listen to what you have today, 30 years later, even in songs, you would say 30 years ago, what the prime example is, if anybody does remember, it was Two Live Crew. I don't know if you remember them. They had a single out, and they had, I think because of them, they started labeling records, parental advice, and all that kind of crap. So this is a prime example of how things have changed. But obviously today, I don't think he would have gotten that much of a problem. As long as you know how to walk the thin line. But some people just don't have a sense of humor. And they're not business people, and that explains to you why Guy Gannett is not in business anymore, and why people are moving over to satellite radio and are paying money. Who would ever think that anybody would pay to hear Howard Stern? So that just shows you where it's just about, it really is freedom of speech. It really is.
It really was. And Neil was a champion of freedom of speech and freedom of expression and he wasn't afraid to talk about gay issues and things like that.
He wasn't afraid to talk about anything. It has nothing to do with, right, gay, sideways, or cross-dressers or anything like that. I mean, he talked about everything. I remember he had a show about how drug companies are hiding stuff from us and all that kind of stuff. And this is 30 years ago, and who would ever think that a company like, I don't want to say any names, but Pfizer or Gilead Science or who knows whatever would actually do things that were maybe not in public's best interest. And I'm not saying any of them are doing it, but later on you do find out all these stories about maybe companies hiding the side effects just to make a few billions and that kind of stuff. So he took on everything and anything and made it interesting and funny. I said it before and I'll say it again. If you gave Neil to do a remote from the South Pole with 3 Eskimos, he would make it funny, and he would, get people to laugh about igloos when there actually is nothing really, I guess, to laugh about. So he always made everything entertaining, and he knew how to make something, nothing. He knew how to make nothing into something.
That was one of his biggest talents.
Yes, it definitely was, because he always had a different way of looking at things and talking about it, and he was he was real. So you mix a talent with a real person who has no qualms about anything, and who has also a good sense of humor, and there you go. You've got a guy who was worth $1 million to some people.
He well was. Thank you so much for your kind words about Neil, and we'll continue this conversation some other time.
My pleasure.